Greetings and salutations. This is Abe Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. Those of you that are not already can become a bitter pill at patreon.com/The Bitter Truth. And as always, you can get some freshly toasted bumper stickers and stuff like that. We are celebrating 1 year of The Bitter Truth. So, excuse me, I may be doubling up on rewards and stuff like that. I can't make a concrete promise because I just kind of thought of it. So, but today, my guest is someone that I've looked up to for quite a while. His name is John Kiriakou. If you've not heard of him, you should know who he is. He was a CIA analyst, senior investigator for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on counterterrorism. He's been an expert on ABC News. He's on all the channels these days. I've seen him on RT, Jimmy Dore. Everybody is talking to this man. He's one of the first CIA anti-torture whistleblowers that was jailed during the Obama administration. That's kind of key to note, and we're going to talk about that. He's a noted author. He's written The Reluctant Spy, The Convenient Terrorist, The Weird Wonderland of America's Secret Wars, Doing Time Like a Spy, Taught to Survive in Prison. We're going to talk about that a little bit. He's also a founding member of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and he's one of the founding members along with Bill Binney, if you know who he is. And John Kiriakou, are you there?
I am. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming on, man. I really am appreciative that you came
pleasure.
on. So I know your time's a little tight, so I'm going to kind of just jump into some stuff. Initially, obviously, when you came forward with the CIA torture of prisoners, that was under the Bush administration, correct?
Yeah, the torture took place under the Bush administration between 2002 and 2005 that we know of. It may have dragged on longer, but certainly the administration never admitted to it.
Right. And then obviously you were already working in that arena, correct?
Yeah, I joined the CIA in January of 1990, rose up through the ranks, and ended up as chief of CIA counterterrorism operations in Pakistan after the 9/11 attacks. I was the executive assistant to the CIA's deputy director, and I left the CIA in mid-2014, waiting for someone, expecting someone to say something about the torture program, which I believed was so patently illegal, besides being immoral and unethical. I thought for sure somebody would say something, and they never did. And I waited for 3.5 more years, and then finally I did.
And what method did you take with that? Was it some of the things that we've seen before, for example, like with Ed Snowden or with Chelsea Manning, where you were able to get information out and then get it into the hands of a reporter, or how did that come about?
Yes and no, or maybe I should more accurately say no and yes. I didn't take anything out. I knew that I would be accused of theft of government property, which is a felony and falls under the Espionage Act if I had done that, and I decided not to. What I did is I talked to Brian Ross of ABC News. He's a multiple Emmy-winning investigative journalist, and I agreed to sit for an interview. And I said 3 things in that interview. I said that the CIA was torturing its prisoners. I said that torture was official U.S. government policy. It was not the result of a rogue officer, which is what President Bush had said. And I said finally that the policy had been personally approved by the president, which he had always denied up until then.
Right. And then explain how you got into hot water.
Yeah.
Did you? I mean, oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
No, I mean, did you think you were kind of in the clear before the Obama administration? How did that kind of process begin?
Yeah. In fact, I knew for certain that I was in the clear. The FBI, as you might imagine, started investigating me the day after that interview. That was December of 2007. They investigated me for a full year until December of 2008. And then in December of 2008, they sent my attorneys something called a declination letter, where they said that they had completed their investigation and they were declining to prosecute me. They said that I hadn't committed a crime, that the torture program was generally known in Washington. I had just confirmed the information rather than leaked the information.
Mm-hmm.
So they closed the case. 3 weeks later, Barack Obama becomes president, and my old nemesis, John Brennan, becomes the Deputy National Security Advisor. He then secretly asked the Justice Department to reopen the case against me, which they did. I had no idea that this case, which had just been closed 3 weeks earlier, was now reopened. And for the next 3 years, the FBI tapped my phones, they intercepted my emails, and they had 3 teams of FBI agents following me everywhere I went. I was working on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee at the time.
Right.
So it's not like I was involved in, some kind of subterfuge or anything.
Right.
But they investigated me for the next 3 years. I'll jump ahead and tell you that in discovery, which we received after I was arrested in January of 2012, we found a memo from John Brennan to Eric Holder saying, charge him with espionage. And Eric Holder responded, my people don't think he committed espionage. And then Brennan wrote back and said, charge him anyway and make him defend himself, which is what they did. They charged me with 3 counts of espionage, 1 count of violating the Intelligence Identities Protection Act of 1981, and 1 count of making a false statement. I hadn't committed espionage. I hadn't made any false statement. And I did confirm the name of a former colleague to a journalist, but the name was never made public.
Right.
But that's what they hung their hats on. At first I was looking at 45 years.
Jesus.
And I refused to take a plea for a full year, and they kept coming down in their offers. My lead attorney told me that he had been an attorney in Washington for 50 years, and he had never seen the Justice Department come down in their offers of time. And I said, well, why are they doing that? And he said, because they have no case, and they know they have no case. So they waited until I went bankrupt, and then they dropped 4 of the 5 charges. But that's what they do. They overcharge. It's called charge stacking.
Okay.
And they wait until you're bankrupt, and then they say, okay, you take a plea for 30 months, you do 23 months, or we go to trial, and nobody ever wins a trial, and you're looking realistically at 18 to 24 years.
Aye.
And my lawyers said, it'll cost you another $3 million for us to defend you. So, what do you do?
What do you do?
It becomes an economic decision.
Right. Well, the thing is the accusation of making false statements, it's been proven that there was an enhanced interrogation program. So on what grounds did they say you were making false statements?
That's a great question, and it's something that journalists never ask me. In August of 2012, I remember sitting in the conference room at Aiken Gump & Strauss, one of the most important law firms in the world, right? They have something like 14,000 lawyers all over the world. And one of the lawyers, the one that I liked and trusted the most, said, we've been spending so much time on these espionage charges. We've never even discussed the false statements charge. He said, what exactly is the false statement supposed to have been? And everybody looked at me, and I said, I'm not really sure. It had something to do with my first book. When I sent my first book in for clearance, I had written to a friend of mine, I sent the book in for clearance, and I laid it on thick, I said. And they interpreted that to mean that I had lied in order to get the book cleared. But I never lied to get the book cleared.
Right.
I mean, in fact, they didn't clear the book. They chopped out 90 pages. So no classified information was ever revealed in the book. I actually went by the book, and I followed the rules.
Right.
And they ended up they couldn't defend that charge anyway, so they just withdrew it.
Wow.
It's crazy. But the thing is, I still spent $100,000-$200,000 defending myself just against that one charge.
Right. And what makes me so angry to hear your story, and I've seen you interviewed before, and the one thing that always just really chaps my ass is that this was supposed to be under the most transparent administration. That was the promise.
Oh, listen, that's the whole crux of this story. Now you're gonna make me do my spiel here. The Espionage Act. My blood still boils when I think about this. The Espionage Act was written in 1917.
Yes.
To combat German saboteurs during the First World War.
Right.
It doesn't even mention the words classified information, because the classification system wasn't even invented until the 1950s.
Right.
Right? And the law was never even updated until the 1990s, and even then, the update was only technical in nature.
Right.
So between 1917 and the inauguration of Barack Obama, 3 Americans were charged with espionage for speaking to the media. Just in the 8 years that Obama was president, he charged 8 people with espionage for speaking to the media. Mm-hmm. He was not the most transparent president in history. He was, quite truthfully, the least transparent president in history. He was the enemy of transparency.
Yep.
He was the enemy, certainly, of whistleblowers, especially national security whistleblowers.
Well, he's the buddy of his donors. I mean, the one thing I hate about the Espionage Act is it does not allow for the public good. You know, when you're trying a case, intent is, 9/10 of if you're in a bar and you intentionally walk up to somebody with a bottle and hit him in the head, and that was a plan, that's first-degree murder.
That's right.
If the death was the result of a fight and it was a crime of passion, then that's a second-degree murder. So intent is everything. And so the challenge I've always had with the Espionage Act, it does not allow for the public good. You know, they'll put you or Chelsea Manning or Ed Snowden into this category of, they're spies. Well, wait a minute.
Right.
What was their intent? The intent was to show the American...
And this is a very important point that you raise. There is no affirmative defense in an Espionage Act case. Mm-hmm. I've spoken a number of times with Ed Snowden about this. He wants to come home, and he's willing to go on trial. And I urge him in every conversation not to do it.
Right.
He says he's willing to go to prison if he can stand up in the courtroom and he can say why he did what he did. And I said, Ed, they will never let you say why you did what you did.
Nope.
There's no affirmative defense to the Espionage Act.
Nope.
You're not going to be allowed to say a single word in the courtroom.
Nope.
And they do that on purpose.
Sure.
You know, they could easily pass an amendment saying, okay, well, if somebody leaks information that is in the public good, you're exposing evidence of waste, fraud, abuse, illegality, or threats to the public health or public safety, which is the definition of whistleblowing, the legal definition, then you should be allowed to go forward with that. And you're not. You're not allowed to do that.
Wow. See, and what's amazing to me is and you know Ed Snowden, I do not. I admire him from afar. But that he still thinks that could happen. I mean, if we saw what happened to Julian Assange just a couple weeks back, when they had 15 minutes to prepare his defense, he said the word "not guilty." That was it, and the judge ranted about what a narcissist he was. I'm going, well, is this the kind of kangaroo court that Ed Snowden can expect to get into? I think so in this culture, in this climate, right?
Precisely. The deck is stacked, and I'm not to heap on, but I'm going to heap on.
Please.
We've all been charged in the Eastern District of Virginia. I was charged there. Snowden was charged there. His charges, of course, are still pending. Julian's been charged there. Jeffrey Sterling, the CIA whistleblower, is charged there. And Judge Leonie Brinkema reserves all national security cases for herself. And so what did she do before President Reagan appointed her to the federal bench? She was a prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia. And under her judgeship, no national security defendant has ever won a case. Never. When I was sentenced, my attorneys negotiated something called an 11C1C plea. Very, very unusual plea. And what it means is the defendant has agreed to plead guilty in exchange for a sentence that the two sides negotiated. The sentence is written in stone, and it cannot be altered by the judge. And she said to me at sentencing that this was the first 11C1C plea that she had ever had, and she's been a judge since 1986. And she said to me, Mr. Kiriakou, I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. If I could, I would send you to prison for the next 10 years. And that told me that the whole case, the whole trial, and everything that we had worked on was just, it was window dressing. Because she had made up her mind in the very beginning, I was guilty because everybody is guilty, and I was going to prison. It was just a question of how long.
Right. See, and that's the thing too, is like when I hear stuff like this, what angers me is the autonomy. Like the other day, some judge went to jail for literally trafficking black teens into private prisons, right?
Yes.
He got 25 years. He got disbarred.
Yes, in Pennsylvania.
Right. That should not be so unusual that it makes the news. That should be so commonplace. Like, I'm from LA. I grew up in South Central. So, when you hear about drive-by shootings, never made the news. You know why? They happen all the time. We should hear about spoiled, rotten DAs and corrupt judges getting busted and going to jail all the time. It shouldn't be so rare. Right?
You're right. You're absolutely right.
So quickly, because I definitely want to maximize our time together. I want to get back to a little bit. You were recruited in 1990, so we're about the same age. You were just what, out of grad school?
Yeah, I had just gotten out of grad school. Actually, it was one of my grad school professors who was, he was undercover as a professor. He was actually a CIA spotter looking for people who would fit into the CIA culture. He recruited me in grad school. That was my
question, and I didn't want to be too ominous about it because one of the greatest films on the OSS CIA transition ever made was a movie called The Good Shepherd with Matt Damon.
Yes.
Based on the novel.
Yes.
And
excellent movie.
I own it. I must have seen it 50 times. My brother got me into it. And anyway, when I saw in your background like 19, I go, I wonder if they got you the same way they got Matt Damon's character, right? And so,
and that's actually illegal now. With passage of the Equal Employment Opportunity Act in 1993, they can't do that anymore. But that's why it was such an old boy kind of agency. Okay. Because what they did is they took these senior officers or even retired senior officers, they cast them all around the country to universities, and they just kind of sat quietly, pretended to be professors. They would teach a class here and there, and then they would pick and choose who they liked, who they thought would be a good fit.
How did you fit into that culture? Because I know you come from a Greek background. I mean, and I only ask because my dad's Arab and my mother's Brazilian. I'm first generation American, and I've had some stuff thrown at me, especially by WASP types, right?
Oh yeah.
And you being Greek, it's like
all the time.
Yeah, in the Northeast,
you get it all the time.
Yeah.
Because the place was still a waspy white man's paradise over there when I first joined. Right. It wasn't until Bill Clinton became president that they actively began to recruit and try to attract talented minorities and women. I mean, there was even a class action suit. Get this, as late as 1994. I had already been in the agency 5 years, and there was a class action suit by all female CIA employees saying that they had been passed over for promotion just because they were women. And in the decision, the federal judge, also in the Eastern District of Virginia, said that he had never seen a case where the defendant had so clearly documented his own crime as the CIA had done. And so what they did is they issued an across-the-board 2-level promotion for every woman in the entire CIA.
Wow.
Yeah. That's pretty bad, huh?
That's a lot of people.
A lot of people.
That's a lot of people
screwed over the years by the agency.
100%. Well, and then at what point did you? Because none of these things. Well, some of these things I suppose are epiphanies. But at what point did you? Was it a development? Yeah. Did a crisis of conscience develop, or did one day you just had this epiphany? You're going, what the fuck are we doing with these people?
You know what? It was all post 9/11. Until 9/11, I really did believe that we were the good guys. Okay. And I believed that, when you would read about this stuff, these, human rights violations and such, that they were anomalies. They were exceptions. Mm-hmm. In the 1990s, when Bill Clinton was president, the CIA underwent something called a cull, C-U-L-L, where they went through the files of literally every recruited asset in the world. And if any asset had any history in his file of human rights abuses, he was fired. And they just cut him off. They fired fully 1/3 of their recruited agents around the world. And I thought, wow, Bill Clinton is serious about human rights, man. This is going to be a new day for us. And it was until September 11th. And then it was like flipping a switch. They went back to the bad old days of before the church committee and the Pike committee, and they just started killing everybody.
Wow.
Next thing you know, there's a torture program, there's a directed assassination program, there's an extraordinary rendition program, there's a system of secret prisons popping up all over the world that nobody knows about. It was like I said, it was like flipping a switch.
Wow. And wow. And so literally the switch flipped for you when you saw all this happen. You were already in the agency.
And listen, September 11th made me as angry as it made anybody else in America, right?
Sure.
I volunteered 3 times before they sent me out as the chief of counterterrorism in Pakistan. Mm-hmm. I was ready to do literally anything that needed to be done to help to protect the country. Mm-hmm. But then little by little, I started seeing these things. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. I'll give you one small example. The night that we captured Abu Zubaydah, mm-hmm. we also captured a lot of other al-Qaeda fighters. I'm not allowed to say the number, but
that's cool.
It was many dozens of al-Qaeda fighters. And we had caught so many of them, we had to bring them into the safe house in shifts to interrogate them. And one of my colleagues brought a paddy wagon full of about a dozen, and they were all wearing hoods. And I said, why are these guys wearing hoods? And he said, well, they're al-Qaeda. We don't want them to see our identities. And I said, have you seriously never read the Geneva Convention? Is that what you're telling me here? You've never read the Geneva Convention? You cannot put hoods on them. Take those hoods off right now. The guy says, I'm going to report you to headquarters. I said, believe me, I'm reporting you to the General Counsel because you just committed a war crime. Wow. So take those effing hoods off.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was that night, which should have been the greatest night of my career. It was that night that I started thinking, I think we may have fallen off the edge here.
Right.
And that's just one small example.
Did that make you sort of retrace our steps, though? Because, I mean,
Totally.
Because literally, when we went into Iraq, and, I was one of the few people, this is a bad idea, dude. He's a dictator. I'm like, yeah, how many dictators are in the world? We can't go popping the cork off of every shitty bottle of wine and then deal with the smell. Leave it alone.
That's right.
Not our business.
Not our problem.
Let the people handle it. And he had nothing to do with fucking 9/11. And so, the long and the short of it is it made me kind of retrace all of our misdeeds. I mean, the Maine, Tonkin, the Korean War, Panama.
Yeah.
You can't talk about Panama without talking about Torrijos, and so you go, or Torrijos rather. So you go back. So now I'm all the way back to the Civil War. I'm like, well, fuck, was that even real? I mean, the Fort Sumter thing might have been a total hoax just to get us into that war because Lincoln had to get us into that war. Did it make you? Did this start to make you kind of retrace your steps or our steps as well?
I actually go over this in great detail in my first book. I got back from Pakistan, and on the strength of the Abu Zubaydah capture, I get promoted, and I'm named deputy director to the. Executive assistant to the deputy director. So on my first day of work, I go into the office and I say to him, "Okay, what are we going to do?" And he said, "Actually, I can't tell you until you go up to the 6th floor and you have to sign a whole bunch of secrecy agreements." So I go up there and knock on the door, and I go in, and they've got all these secrecy agreements laid out on a desk, and I said, "I'm here to sign them," and he gives me a pen, and I sign all 6 of these things, and when I finished, I said, "Okay, so what gives?" And he says, "Well, next year in February, we are going to invade Iraq. We're going to overthrow Saddam Hussein. We are going to install our own puppet. We're going to open the world's largest Air Force base in southern Iraq, and we're going to move all of our air assets out of Saudi Arabia into Iraq to deprive Osama bin Laden of the ability to say that we are polluting the land of the 2 holy mosques." And I was so dumbfounded. I just stared at him, and finally I said, "But we haven't caught bin Laden yet." And he said, "Buddy," he said, "the decision's already been made, and here's how it lines up." He said, on the one side, you've got the Office of the Vice President, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council. On the other side, you have the CIA, the State Department, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and guess which side loses? And that was it. Nobody at the CIA wanted to go into Iraq. We wanted to kill every last al-Qaeda fighter on the face of the planet, and we had to hunt down bin Laden. But Dick Cheney said, no, we don't care about bin Laden anymore. We're going to go into Iraq, and we're going to overthrow Saddam Hussein, and we're going to take everything those people have.
God damn it.
Yep.
See, and that's what makes me so angry.
Let me interrupt you for one second.
Please. No, you go.
I went into an office in something called the Iraq Operations Group one day. I went up to pick up a briefing book, and the guy who had given me the secrecy agreements to sign, he was the director of Iraq operations. So these are serious, these are high-level people I'm dealing with every day. And he's sitting there at his desk, and he's got these Crayola-colored markers, and he's coloring something. So I said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm designing the new Iraqi flag. And I said, don't you think maybe the Iraqis should design the new Iraqi flag? And he looks at me and he says, not necessarily. And I thought, man, we are in serious trouble here. Serious trouble.
This gets right back to the Sykes-Picot thing. It's that white.
Absolutely, it does.
It's two white imperialists on a bar napkin.
Deciding the borders of the world.
Yeah, they're like, okay, well, when the Turks go down, this is how it's going to go down. And the first Shah was appointed. That's why when the first Shah ran afoul of the Brits and the Russians with wanting to nationalize Iranian oil in the 1920s, they were like, well, fuck that, and they removed him and installed the second Shah, who we know to be the Shah, and that whole story. So I mean, my point in all of that is we just don't seem to learn our lessons from this colonial white imperialism, and that's all it is. That is. All it is. My dad's Palestinian, right? So I've heard all kinds of crap my whole life. Mm-hmm. One thing that amazed me, I remember in the 90s, when everyone was about saving the Muslims, I'm like, yeah, you really care when they're white, don't you? Because, when they're brown Muslims, you don't seem to give a shit. I mean, it's just sort of that way. And what you're describing right now, it's pretty much the Sykes-Picot thing.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. When the Brits finally, came to the realization that they weren't the global power they had once been, we said, no problem, we can take it from here. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. We became the reserve currency, and that's why we can afford to do these stupid regime change wars, because we keep printing the money to do it. But a few years back, we almost got voted out of being reserve currency. I think we barely stayed in by 2 votes. So Trump committing his fuckery all around the world, pissing people off. I don't know how the vote's going to go next time. If they make the petro yuan the reserve currency, we could be in for a lot of problems. Is that something that I'm too far-fetched on thinking?
I think you're right.
Well, it's really too bad that I'm right, because I'm just a guy with a day job who actually has a mic, and that's it. I don't have any credentials. I didn't go to journalism school or anything like that. Well, listen, John, I know your time's a little tight. I know you host your podcast Loud and Clear. Is there anything else that you wanted to? And I know you have your website, johnkiriakou.com. Is there anything else that you wanted to sort of share with the listeners?
Oh, thank you. No, that's about it. johnkiriakou.com. I'm on Twitter and Facebook and all the usual stuff.
Excellent. Well, what I'll do is I'll put I'll definitely put links to your stuff in the body of the show. But again, I'd love to have you come on again at some later point. And as things develop, I was going to ask you about Daniel Hale, but we're out of time. But
it's my pleasure. But I'm happy to talk to you about Daniel Hale the next time.
Absolutely. Well, hey, listen, folks. My guest has been John Kiriakou, noted author, host of Loud and Clear. Again, you can become a bitter pill by visiting patreon.com/thebittertruth. And if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.